Poor 5G spectrum management undermines both privacy rights and national security. That's according to a former White House senior director for strategic planning on the National Security Council. Retired Air Force Brigadier General Robert Spalding is currently at the Hudson Institute. General, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I want to start with a quote from your op-ed. It says this: treating 5G electromagnetic spectrum as real estate to be auctioned off to the highest bidder robs the American people of what should be administered as a common good. Can you explain that?
Well, I think the best example to kind of visualize it, because spectrum is such a hard thing to understand, is imagine 95. Everybody knows how congested that is. And you're driving down 95 and you're completely jammed in traffic, and you look over and there's another highway and cars are whizzing by, but you have no way to get on an on-ramp. That's the way that we divide spectrum today in the country, and it makes it impossible for us to take full advantage of 5G, which is a new technology which enables you to cobble together large pieces of spectrum to make these big superhighways. Only we don't administer it that way.
But you don't like the auction system, and auctioning spectrum has raised over $200 billion since the mid-1990s. That's a lot of money for the U.S. Treasury.
It is, but if 5G was fully realized in the United States, the estimates are that the benefit to the American people and the economy would be in the trillions. So when you compare 200 billion to trillions of economic value that could be gained by the American people, I think it's a big difference.
So you use the term in your article, squandering spectrum. How is the current system wasteful in your view?
Well, if you took a spectrum analyzer, something that could detect where spectrum was being used in the United States, and you walked around the United States today, what you would find is there's areas where spectrum is being utilized to its full extent, and then there's vast areas where spectrum's not being utilized at all. So what happens is the FCC, which has traditionally had a preference to incumbents, has gone either from giving spectrum away to selling spectrum. Both are inefficient in terms of how it allocates spectrum, particularly with 5G. 5G is a new technology which enables you to cobble together all of these pieces of spectrum, some that are being well used, others that are not being used at all, and make one big superhighway. And that's the piece that I was referring to.
You know, your op-ed also says that Americans pay among the highest wireless subscription rates in the world for some of the slowest data speeds. But I thought we had pretty good service here.
It is really, if you go around Europe and Asia, it is really bad compared to the rest of the world. And the reason is a lot of countries have gotten into the habit of sharing infrastructure. So we do that today here in the United States. A company like Crown Castle, which is a tower company, works with all the carriers to put their radio equipment on their towers. So in some respects, we are sharing there at the tower level, but other countries go further and they actually share at the network level. So Singapore is a good example of this. They have 3 virtual network operators and 1 physical network that all the operators share. And in my paper when I was at the White House, when I wrote about the opportunities and challenges of 5G, I said sharing that infrastructure, that network infrastructure, is really where you can get the least cost for investment and the highest outcomes in terms of speed and bandwidth for users.
So besides sharing infrastructure, what specific recommendations do you have for better wireless spectrum management?
Yes, I think we've tended to look at this in terms of national, and I think it would be better to think of it in terms of local. So if we had areas where you could, local areas where you could cobble together spectrum on one piece of infrastructure, it might be beneficial to that area. Now, when you think about the entire country, it could be that the United States sets aside some amount of spectrum for deployment in this manner. In other words, the spectrum could be either given away or sold, either one, but whoever was building the infrastructure would be required to build it according to a certain set of standards. One is we're going to have all the spectrum available via one network, which would enable better bandwidth. But the other is we're going to protect the data that's carried within that network. That's essentially what I was trying to say when I wrote my op-ed.
So where is China now in 5G deployment?
Well, they're vastly surpassing the United States. You know, way more infrastructure deployed, 10 times at least more infrastructure than in the United States. Also, what the government did was to say, hey, all of you network operators, you're going to have to build cooperatively. In other words, you're going to have to share the infrastructure, because they understood that if they did it that way, they would have less investment in terms of cost to the country and more capability in terms of the user.
So what kind of impact does this have to national security, poor spectrum management? How would that impact national security?
Well, not only does it impede innovation in these technologies like artificial intelligence, autonomy, 5G, but also because there's no standards with regard to how we protect the data within, that data is accessible by the Chinese. So what China says is, we want to be the Saudi Arabia of data. And the reason they say that is because data fuels artificial intelligence development. So they believe that they have access to their data, they have access to our data because it's all open, and they're therefore going to have the best artificial intelligence in the world. And I think if we were to focus on protecting our data, encrypting it, for example, and ensuring the widest availability via a network like I'm talking about, then having that artificial intelligence developed in the United States would enable us to compete with China in that area.
All right, well, General Spalding, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.